So thank you all so much for coming. I'm sorry I'm tethered a little bit back here so that I can work on the presentation. But I'm Michelle Ehrenberg. I'm the executive director and co-founder of Lift Louisiana. And I'm really, really pleased to be here tonight. And I want to thank the college for letting us use this space, and Chantrell and Sally for working with me on putting this event together. We are kind of doing a road show around the state. We've already done one of these events in Shreveport, and we're doing one in Baton Rouge this weekend, in New Orleans next week. We had to cancel the one, the North Shore in Abita Springs, but we're going to be rescheduling that, and we'll be working also to schedule one in Ruston. So if you know people in any of those areas that you think might be interested in this content, please invite them to come. They're all of the events are on Facebook. So for those of you who don't know about, we've done these in the past, not as many of them as we're doing this year. This was a very interesting legislative session on off years, on odd numbered years. So the session is a fiscal session, so they really are supposed to be dealing with the budget, and usually there's not a whole lot of kind of controversial bills that come up during budget sessions because they're really just supposed to be working on the budget. However, this year was unusual, and I think that a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's an election year. So there were some really interesting outcomes. So today what we want to do is to, talk a little bit about some of the bills that Lift Louisiana was following and what the outcomes of those were. And then I also wanted to give an update on some pending litigation that is happening around reproductive rights that's relevant to Louisiana. And then we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about what are things that we can do, and we're going to ask you guys, if you're willing, to actually participate in a thank you note writing exercise. So you can also interrupt me at any time if you have questions, because we are such a small group. So who is Lift Louisiana? So we are a reproductive rights organization, and our mission is to educate, to advocate, and litigate for policy changes that would improve the health and well-being of Louisiana women, their family, and their communities. So that's kind of a mouthful, but fundamentally we are focused on making sure that the policies that are put forward in Louisiana are actually making our communities better by changing the lives of women in particular. So this legislative session, we were focused on kind of three general issue areas. So first was the Equal Rights Amendment. Next, we focused on economic justice, and so under that we worked on equal pay legislation, on minimum wage, on paid family leave, and on the pink tax, which I'll explain as we go through. And then we also worked on reproductive justice issues and all the restrictions on abortions that were proposed and passed this legislative session. Just to be clear, our position was opposing the restrictions on abortion. So the Equal Rights Amendment, so Louisiana could have been the 38th state and the last state needed to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. And so the Equal Rights Amendment is a very, very, very simple proposed amendment to the United States Constitution that would guarantee equal rights for women. And it's something that I think is really important. It was originally proposed, shortly after the 19th Amendment was ratified, and then there was kind of a new fight around it in the 70s, and here we are today, and we have 37 states that have ratified the Equal Rights Amendment. We need one more state to ratify, and it was a really interesting debate this session. The bill was introduced by Senator J.P. Morrell, who's a senator from the New Orleans area, and it was opposed by the Louisiana Right to Life and the Family Forum. So I have some videos just so you guys can get a little bit of an idea about what the opposition to these bills were. So the first one is actually JP responding to the Louisiana Right to Life's testimony against the bill in the Senate committee when it was first heard this session.
We heard about equal pay. Let me be honest. I've authored equal pay legislation. You guys know you're in all the committees with it. I have not seen Louisiana Right to Life or the Family Forum show up one time in support of equal pay. If you support women having babies, you support them being paid equally to take care of their kids. So if you're for the family, I've got 2 bills tomorrow. I've got a bill in committee tomorrow on equal pay. I hope to see you there.
So we clipped that and we put it up on our Facebook page because I think that it pretty much summed up the controversy around this bill pretty well. So the next one.
Senator Morell, I appreciate your thoughts.
This is Senator.
I appreciate your thoughts, and as a woman, we just had a resolution recognizing 100 years since we received the right of suffrage. But I rise today as a woman, as a mother, as a grandmother that wants a clear understanding of why I'm voting no. And it's going to be a difficult thing to explain to women. I want my granddaughter to know why I voted no. And I want to be really clear. I'm going to focus on one aspect of the discussion. We have a situation right now where, and I've passed the quote out, there is a connection to abortion and the ERA. And if you look at the quote, it says, with this ratification, the ERA would reinforce the constitutional right to abortion by clarifying that the sexes have equal rights, which would require judges to strike down anti-abortion laws. So this is just one aspect. There's lots of points we could discuss, but I'm standing here as a woman in Louisiana that 100 years could not have voted, and I'm a state senator. I believe that I have the right to accomplish what I set out for. I really look hard at what rights I'm lacking that would allow me to do something I can't do right now.
So I think that this was the biggest point of opposition to the Equal Rights Amendment. All the people that came up and opposed it and all the legislators that voted against it, fundamentally they were just opposed to and the idea that the Equal Rights Amendment might actually be applicable to abortion access. So it was a very interesting debate, and unfortunately it did fail. I think that there were only 9 senators that actually stood and voted for the Equal Rights Amendment. So we have a lot of work to do there. So I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a snapshot of sort of what sort of the state of economic insecurity in Lafayette is, just by numbers. Obviously, you guys live here, so you know. So I pulled out like 4 of the Senate districts in the area, and just wanted to sort of highlight what is happening. The rate of people that are living in poverty, the rate of children living in poverty, how many people in the community are recipients of SNAP, of food stamp benefits, just to give you an idea of how people sort of are struggling in this area, because 3 out of these 4 senators consistently vote against all of the bills that would actually increase people's wages, provide for equal pay, or otherwise create more economic security for families in Louisiana. So, again, we worked on equal pay. Senator J.P. Morell carried that bill as well. That bill was really focused this year on ending pay secrecy. So in Louisiana, if you discuss your wages with another employee at a company, you can be fired. The company can retaliate against you and fire you for discussing your wages. And so the proposal that Senator Morell put forward would have prohibited that kind of retaliation from business owners against employees for having conversations. And the reason that this is important is because how are you ever going to know that you are being paid unequal if you don't know what your coworkers are making, and especially those that are doing the same job as you? Yes?
It just strikes me that this is a violation of freedom of speech. Has there been a federal action brought against violation of the First Amendment?
No. And I think a lot of it is that the companies will come up with all kinds of other excuses as to why they.
Speech is the First Amendment.
Yeah.
How can you come up with an excuse?
It could be proprietary rights.
Unbelievable.
I think proprietary rights
Would be free speech.
If you're an employee for that company, they can look into your your computer and test anything you want. And that guy in Iowa was just fired for sending out 2-pack things to the staff.
Huh.
Yeah, but this is pretty straightforward.
I think corporate law trumps a lot of that.
Yeah, and I think that the difficulty is that, a lot of the times when people try to bring cases like this against their employers, there really isn't strong law in place. Again, why we need the Equal Rights Amendment, that employees can use to defend themselves against. There's sort of a patchwork of laws, federal and some state laws that are trying to address these issues, but they're not really doing it in a comprehensive way. And there's so many loopholes that companies are able to to say, well, I didn't fire them for disclosing or discussing their wages. I fired them because of, some other reason. And it's very difficult. It's always sort of on the employee to prove otherwise. But unfortunately, this bill also failed. It made it out of the committee in the Senate, but it wasn't. It was never able to get enough votes to pass the full Senate. So there were two different efforts to raise the minimum wage. So one was really a local effort. This was introduced by Representative Duplessis, who is a New Orleans representative, and his bill would have just basically taken away the state's ability to preempt local municipalities from passing ordinances that they could use to raise the minimum wage, to provide equal pay, to provide paid family leave. It would have addressed a lot of those economic justice issues when it comes to employees at private firms in the cities. So, this would have basically just said, hey, we're not asking the state to do this, for everybody. We're just saying, well, if we want to do it in New Orleans or if we want to do it in Lafayette or in Shreveport, then we should be able to do that. And unfortunately, the state is very concerned about local municipalities going out on their own and creating better working conditions and better wages for certain employees. So unfortunately, that effort also failed, as well as a proposed constitutional amendment that was introduced by Senator Troy Carter. And that amendment would have gone on the ballot in 2020, and it would have raised the minimum wage from $7.25 an hour to $9 an hour. And that bill also failed. The last that I had heard about it from Senator Carter towards the end of the session was that he actually did think that he had about 20 votes in the Senate to pass it, which would have, which was a pretty decent number for a raise in the minimum wage, and certainly more than we've seen in past years. But for a constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 of the Senate to agree to vote on it, and he wasn't anywhere near that. So he actually never even brought it up for a full vote. There was a coalition that formed about mid-year last year called Louisiana Families First, and It was made up with a bunch of different kinds of organizations, everyone from sort of the United Way, the Partnership for Children and Families, the Louisiana Budget Project, and then, some of the women's rights advocacy organizations like Lift Louisiana were involved in the coalition to try to pass the Louisiana Paid Family and Medical Leave Act. And what it would do is just require that companies provide, a modest amount of paid medical and family leave, and it would actually, it would have been not completely on the companies, but it would have been sort of like a payroll tax. So employees would pay into the program, and it's not like the gold standard of paid family leave policy, because it does, put a lot of the responsibility for creating the fund that you would then be able to access on the individual employees. And as we know, people are making pretty low wages already in Louisiana. And I think a lot of the really low wage workers in Louisiana may not have even been able to be eligible for the program. But it was going to be a start in the right direction, and there was, a pretty good bipartisan, sort of conservative and progressive coalition behind it. And unfortunately, it made it out of one of the committees, and then it went to the Senate Finance Committee, which is where pretty much all progressive economic policy in Louisiana goes to die. And so, so I don't even think it ever actually got a full hearing in that committee. So, the coalition's not giving up. They're going to come back and try this again next year. And we're currently, really trying to find a strong legislator that can carry it and really put their full weight behind it and line up, a kind of a bipartisan coalition of co-authors to introduce it as well. And then last was the pink tax. So Senator J.P. Morrell carried this bill. This is something that he's tried to do several years, several budget sessions since he's been in office, and this is his last year in the Senate. So we're not sure who's gonna pick this up, because this one also did not make it, even though it did actually pass both houses, but there were changes made to it, and so those changes had to be resolved. It went to what's called a conference committee, where a certain number of members of the House of Representatives and a certain number of senators get together, and they work out the differences, and they put together a report. And unfortunately, the bill failed to get the signature of one legislator that was needed in order to finalize the report and for the bill to finally pass. And so even though it really had a lot of bipartisan support and passed overwhelmingly in both houses, just on this sort of like technicality, it failed. So we do think that we can get it through next year. We just got to find the right person to carry it forward. So we'll talk a little bit more about each of these, because I've got some video also to show you. So just for some context, Louisiana's pay gap is the worst in the nation and has been for years. No surprise, we're always at the bottom of every list that you don't want to be at the bottom of. But I think that what's really stark about how this is affecting women in Louisiana, and particularly Black women in Louisiana, because we're at the very bottom and Black women are at the very bottom of the pay gap in Louisiana, they are at the very bottom of the pay gap in the entire country. And, the result is that they earn only 48 cents to every dollar that men make. And that is just really, really shameful. And we have so many, families that are being, led by women of color in this state. And so this is just fiscally untenable for us to have this kind of a pay gap, especially for women of color. And so it's something that we really, really, really need to focus on. And you can see the difference that, when you take the sort of the overall women, so that's, all women in Louisiana, it's 69 cents. So the gap even, between women of color and sort of the general population of women is also pretty stark. What I think that we really need to start focusing on is how do we close the pay gap for women of color in the state, because if we can close that gap, it's necessarily going to lift all the women in Louisiana's pay. So if we were to establish a $9 minimum wage, which, let's be clear, that is still not a living wage, over 200,000 people in Louisiana would have gotten a raise. And, polling has been done on this issue over the last several years, and every single poll comes out exactly the same, that 3/4 of the people in this state support raising the minimum wage. I think it's again really shameful that this is an issue that has such overwhelming public support, yet our legislators are not voting for it. And I think that what that really says is that we need to figure out a way to have that 76% of people in Louisiana that support this to really make this an issue with their legislators, and make sure that their legislators really understand that this is something that that they want as voters. And we focus on this issue because 2/3 of the workers who would actually receive a wage increase are women, because that's how many of the population that's making minimum wage are women in Louisiana. Oh, I think I went back. So when the coalition got together, they did some polling and some focus groups on paid family and medical leave, because they really sort of wanted to understand, again, where people in Louisiana were. And only 35% of new moms in Louisiana are able to take any form of leave after childbirth, and that's even below the national average of 55%. And again, the polling came back on this one, overwhelming support for paid family and medical leave. And when we, start talking about the next kind of big issue that we're going to get to, it's pretty, it's pretty unbelievable that we would live in a state where we're not going to give, moms or dads, new parents, time off to welcome a child into their family, when we're so committed to making sure that every single pregnancy ends in birth. So the pink tax is, I was calling it the tampon tax, but that really doesn't quite sum it up. So what this would have done is actually eliminate the sales tax that the state and local governments charge on diapers and feminine hygiene products. So we exempt all kinds of things in the state of Louisiana from sales tax, both at the state and local level, including things like farm equipment and prescription drugs and groceries. So even, your sodas or your Cheetos are, exempt from sales tax. And so all this would have done was to eliminate the sales tax on diapers and feminine hygiene products. And it doesn't seem like a lot of money, but in a place like Jefferson Parish, for example, the sales tax for state and local government is 10.5%. And so if you look at, one family, one child, and, diaper-aged child for the year, that's $70 for that child that year that family would send. I mean, that pays an electricity bill. So, it really does add up. And the opposition to it, obviously, is, well, it's going to cost the state, over $9 million. That's revenue that the state and local government, state government is not going to be bringing in. But I think the alternative way to think about that is that it would save women and families $9 million. So, unfortunately, you heard the story, but I want to play this little bit of video of the testimony that Senator Morell gave on this bill when it was in the committee, because I think it's pretty illuminating, and just like how difficult it is for the people that were going to oppose this to really justify opposing it.
All right. Senator Hewitt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So how do we decide what are the essentials from a tax policy standpoint? I think we're making things more complicated by adding more and more exemptions. You could use cloth diapers like we did back in the day.
And cloth diapers would also be exempt under this legislation. So, I mean, I agree. If your suggestion is that poor women should go make their own cloth diapers, I think that is a position. I don't think it's a realistic position, considering my wife and I actually did cloth. The amount of money you have to pay for the chemicals, additional items to sanitize cloth diapers, to make them available to be used on children without creating rashes and the like, is very expensive. Honestly, if you did all the things required to do cloth diapers and maintain them and measured it with disposable is measurably cheaper. So, I mean, though cloth diapers are better for the environment, mind you, like many organic things, it's not the cheaper alternative.
You actually, when you have to bring your child to daycare, you have to be responsible for ensuring their diapers. And so this can actually, I mean, this can be an impediment for many families if they can't afford those diapers in terms of being able to even put their child in daycare.
In every daycare that I've experienced with my 3 children, part of the daycare agreement is you bring diapers, you bring wipes. And I cannot imagine the difficulty and embarrassment
Yes.
if you have a child that you're barely keeping in daycare and you can't make ends meet to bring the diapers, or if you're breaking your back to put your kid through daycare and you have to go to a diaper bank to hope they have diapers in stock to meet the criteria. Because with most daycares, the moment you don't bring diapers is the moment they tell you you have to keep your child at home until you have diapers.
Good point. Senator Hewitt never got it. She voted against the bill. All right. So, SB 184, which was introduced by Senator Milkovich, was a proposal. You may have read about it or heard about it as a heartbeat ban, which I think actually mischaracterizes what the bill does. Essentially, it would ban abortions as early as 6 weeks, which is earlier than most women even know that they're pregnant. So essentially, it would have been a complete ban on abortions for most women in Louisiana. This bill had more discussion and debate than I have seen on an abortion restriction in the last 5 years that I've been paying close attention to these bills. And at every step of the way, we had lawmakers that were expressing concern that about how early in pregnancy this bill was, and also that there were no exceptions provided in this bill for rape and incest victims or survivors. And so there were several points where legislators did try to add those amendments, and they were opposed. And the first time was in the Senate committee where the bill was first heard. And the Louisiana Right to Life got up to oppose the amendment that had just been passed and put on the bill in that committee. And then the bill was actually the amendment was stripped off the bill. Yes.
I'd like to add something too. The exception that they do have to save the life of the mother is so incredibly strenuous to satisfy. Right? The doctor has to sign an affidavit, and it has to go on record. They have to keep the records for the woman for what, like 7 years?
Yes.
Something like that. So not only is it intimidating physically, but it's intimidating in terms of privacy.
Right.
Thing too. So it essentially does not support the supporting the life of the mother.
Right. Yes, yes. It would be very difficult for a doctor to make that determination and to comply.
There,
right.
not practical.
That's right. That's right. Thank you. So, yes, it's playing.
All right. Go ahead, Mr. Clapper.
Thank you, Senators. Senators Ben Clapper, Executive Director of Louisiana Right to Life. We're a state pro-life organization that's been around since 1970, working to restore the right to life through education, activism, legislation, and service. We came supporting the bill today. We believe that every unborn child, every human being for that matter, deserves a fundamental human right to life. And the fact that the child has a heartbeat is one of the clearest markers of the humanity of the child, and because of that, we support that concept. However, we do oppose the amendment that added rape and incest to the bill, and that's very concerning for us as an organization. However, our law, as one of the leading pro-life states in the country, we have no rape and incest exceptions in other portions of our law. And so this is concerning that we have added this amendment to it. We would even potentially consider not supporting the legislation if this amendment is put on the bill. Every unborn child, no matter of how they were conceived, deserves the right to life. Thank you so much. Every unborn child, no matter how they were conceived, deserves the right to life. They deserve the same protection no matter how they were brought into this world. And so we would be concerned about that amendment on the bill.
So in that committee, the amendment was proposed. It was added to the bill without any objection. And then after Mr. Clapper gave his testimony, they voted to rescind the amendment off the bill. It was pretty incredible. When the bill came to the House side, Representative Ted James again tried to add the rape and incest exception on, and there was a lot of testimony, over 2 hours of testimony, of conservatives and, progressives coming up and talking about, whether they agreed with the amendment or didn't agree with the amendment. So I've put together just a clip here.
That we had to face a very hard choice, and I know that the governor has faced a similar choice.
Does this bill, is it trying to tell a woman what she can or cannot do with her body?
Well, I believe in a woman's choice.
I'm very familiar with the story, the governor's story and his family, and now I'm familiar with the story of Representative Hodges. And one thing that was very consistent in both of those stories is the fact that they had a conversation as a family. And they made a choice. It's a family decision. That's not a decision for us. We are not that important to make that decision.
Again, if we could pass a bill that would allow us to let the mother choose. If you want choice, let her choose to execute the rapist. That's fine. I'm for that. I'm not for this bill, and
I believe that my choice ends when another life begins.
It's not easy. It's not easy if somebody's been raped. But there was a choice. She gave me up.
The word that I keep hearing from everybody is, it starts with a C and ends with an E. Choice.
Yeah, it was pretty remarkable. So, as you all know, the bill did pass, and it is not in effect because Louisiana has started this new interesting thing where they pass unconstitutional laws, but then they say that they're only effective if the law is upheld in court from another state. So they're waiting to see Mississippi's litigation go forward before making their law effective. So it's interesting because I think this is a reaction to them actually acknowledging that they are spending way too much money defending unconstitutional restrictions on abortion, and so they are trying to prevent organizations like mine from from immediately suing them and taking them to court on a bill like this. So the other big one that we worked on this year was a constitutional amendment. To the Louisiana Constitution, it would have the amendment basically would say that no provision of the Constitution protects the right to abortion or requires the funding of abortion. And again, this provides no exception for rape and incest. And, right now, it really would not have any effect on women's access. But if Roe v. Wade were ever overturned or something like that, happened where the protections provided by the federal government were eroded, then this constitutional amendment would hold, and women would not be able to access an abortion in Louisiana. It was proposed to be on the ballot in 2019, and then there was an effort to get the date changed, so it'll be on the ballot in 2020.
I rise in opposition to this bill. I'm sure many of you already know that, but I'm really coming down today because there is a line, a vein of rhetoric in this debate which I think is very disingenuous. This is not a pro-life bill, it is a pro-birth bill. And let me be more clear in how I explain that. This legislature has voted repeatedly in support of pro-birth. We in this legislature have failed. I'll give you a couple examples. We have failed to repeal or have significant debate on the death penalty. That is a pro-life stance. You can give your rationale as to caveats as to why there should be exceptions to life, but that is a pro-life issue. It's established by almost every religious head in the entire world. That's one example. This is a pro-birth bill and a pro-birth state because we don't legitimately accept or support health care expansion for these mothers having children. Currently, our Attorney General is fighting to repeal the Affordable Care Act with no funded replacement. So we support birth, but we don't support the health care provided for the mother, the health care provided for the children, or health care in general. That has been established. We have people who come here who vilify people on welfare, who, in the midst of the debate on how old we should allow children to have babies, make the comment that it's better for them to get married at 10 when they're having the baby than be single. Our fixation is so much on micromanaging the family. Once again, that is a pro-birth stance, not a pro-life stance, because the life of a 10-year-old married to a 40-year-old is not much of a life at all. We are a pro-birth state because there are children currently languishing in foster care, and as a state, we've established that we don't want non-traditional families adopting children. So you might have a non-traditional family, and by non-traditional, I mean non-traditional by our state's definition, of 2 men or 2 women who desperately want to raise a child who's in foster care, who's getting limited services, limited support. But we have decided as a state, we know better than them, so their lives are going to continue to be miserable in the foster care system because we put up hurdles each day to allow for same-sex couples to adopt children and provide loving homes. Pro-birth, not pro-life. I have really struggled through this debate because I think that people are more concerned with how they phrase things than simply saying where they're at. And if you support this bill as a pro-birth bill, please say that and stop misrepresenting that you're pro-life, whether it's for these mothers or for these children.
That was one of the best speeches that I've ever seen, which is why I let it run long. But yeah, I think that pretty much sums up how the debate went on the abortion restrictions this session. I want to do a time check and just see if folks are interested in the litigation. If not, we can skip it. Sally is. Show of hands. I'm going to try to make this not super nerdy. Okay. In 2014, Louisiana passed a law requiring that doctors who provide abortions have to have admitting privileges at a local hospital. So that means they have to be able to admit a patient. Hospitals really only grant privileges, those kinds of privileges, to doctors who are going to admit a lot of patients and who are, really going to be active in the, the hospital system. And abortion providers don't admit patients because abortion is a safe procedure, and so there are rarely complications, and even more rarely complications that require hospitalization. In addition, hospitals are not, interested in having abortion providers sort of on, their roster of doctors that are providing care at that hospital because protesters. So anyway, Louisiana passed this law in 2014. It was exactly the same as the law that passed in Texas the year earlier, and the law in Texas went all the way to the Supreme Court. In 2016, the Supreme Court looked at the law in Texas and said, this law has no medical benefit. This is just a ruse. You're just trying to close clinics down. That's against the Constitution, and we are overturning this law in Texas. You can't do this. But Louisiana, our Attorney General said, well, we're going to keep fighting for our law regardless, because we just disagree with the Supreme Court's decision, and we're going to ignore that precedent, and we're going to keep going forward. And so in the fall of last year, our law was before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is a very conservative court circuit, and the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld Louisiana's law and said, okay, the law actually is constitutional. We, don't think that the Supreme Court precedent in the Texas case really applies. Really, these doctors could comply with the law if they just tried harder, and we think that the law is fine, and we're going to allow it to go into effect. And so the people that were fighting on the side of the abortion providers in the state asked the Supreme Court on an emergency basis to review the case. And in March, in early March, the Supreme Court stepped in and said, hold on, don't let this law go into effect. We might want to take a look at this because we just decided the same law 2 years ago. So we're going to block the law for now while we decide whether or not we really want to dig into this case. So where we're at with that is that in April, the plaintiffs in the case, so the lawyers that are representing the abortion providers in the state, filed a petition, which is called a cert petition, with the Supreme Court that says, this is our objection to the law, and we think that you should strike the law down. And then in May, Louisiana filed what they're calling a counter cert petition. So they're saying, if the Supreme Court takes this case up, we want you to both uphold our law, and we also want you to make a decision that abortion doctors cannot stand in for their patients in these lawsuits anymore, which would mean that in order for an abortion restriction to be challenged in court, actual patients would have to be the named plaintiffs in the lawsuit, which is, as you can imagine, very, very, very difficult, which is why the courts have always recognize the ability of doctors to represent their own patients in these cases. So what we're waiting for now is in October, the Supreme Court will decide on whether it's going to what's called grant cert. There's three possible outcomes with that. So they could either grant the cert petition, which says, okay, we're going to have oral arguments and you guys come argue your sides, or they can deny cert, which would mean that the law would go into effect immediately, and that would mean that most, if not all, the abortion clinics in Louisiana would close immediately. Or what they could do is what the petitioners are asking for, which is a summary reversal. So essentially they would say, we're not even going to hear this. We already decided it. This is ridiculous. We're just closing this down. We're shutting it down. The law is overturned, and let's move on. So that's the last one that I gave you, the summary reversal, is like what we're really hoping for in this case. If they grant cert, then the oral arguments would be in January or February, and then a decision would likely come down in June. So that's where we are. So summary reversal, grant cert, we have no idea what the outcome of that might be, and then deny cert, the law would go into effect and we would close down, you know, at least 2, maybe all 3 of the remaining abortion clinics in the state. So we are preparing for that. Before we get into the what can we do, let me just pause and see if anyone has questions on any of the stuff that I've gone over, because there's a lot of information.
You know, what are we going to do after Jason Morrell starts?
I know, right? I know. We
All
really.
I can say is thank God for the Black Caucus.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that kind of gets to one of the what can we do's, which is you can vote, you can bring other people to vote, you can register voters, and you can either run for office yourself, which I know that we have some people in the room that are running for office, and if you want to get up and say why you're running and what you're running for. We are a nonpartisan organization and can't endorse candidates, but, you know, we're happy to, you know, and also people should find someone that is running that you believe in and work on their campaign, volunteer for their campaign. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Leslie Borg. I'm running for State House Rep. Basically, I am running because someone told me, one of my son's teachers, when I got to mom at school, said she'd been following me on Facebook and my voice and what I've been doing in the community, and she told me to be an agent of change. And she said, I've been following you, be an agent of change. And that was so profound to me, and I went home, and I thought about it, what does it mean, and as much as I've been doing in the community and trying to raise awareness on important issues that, you know, I fight for, I thought, what can I do more? So I am stepping into the ring. My opponent hasn't ever ran for office. He's been unopposed for 8 years, ran with MTC. So we're kind of on the same playing field as far as this is both our first time actually campaigning. And it's been interesting to say the least, but I've learned so much. And I'm really proud to be on this for our party and just try my best. So.
Excellent. Running for office isn't easy, so we think, yeah.
And why are you better than Stewart? Why did we vote for you instead of Stewart?
Right, that's a good question. Basically, from what I know about Stewart is he likes the idea of being in Beveridge more than actually working for the people in this district. I looked at his voting record. I mean, this wasn't a very light decision I took. I have 2 young kids. But when I looked at his voting record, he has been graded very highly on corporate businesses and 0% on education, which is a huge thing for me, having a son in school. So that was an integral part of why I was running. Also, he just doesn't vote very often. And I think the people that are working hard, paying taxes, need someone that is going to actually stand up and be a representative.
Would you take a pledge right now not to punch anybody in the bar?
So thank you, Leslie. And you make a really good point about legislators that actually just don't even show up to vote, because there are actually quite a lot of them. We are in the process of putting together a sort of a shame list of legislators that consistently are absent because sometimes people are legitimately absent, but there are a lot of legislators that are just not taking votes. So that's a good point.
It's like one thing that I just recently heard about, but which I didn't know. So in the special session, he was the leading factor of why it went longer. They could have stopped this. They had votes for it. They had it all kind of wrapped up, and they spent 2 days playing with him, trying to get him to vote, and he wouldn't actually come down and vote because he was sick. And he ended up, I had spoken to a senator that, was trying to get him to vote, just vote, one way or another, vote. And he ended up voting against it, so it ended up going on. But that's just votes, like, that's Richard Nixon. So that was very disturbing to think about.
We're being recorded. Oh, for ASC? Hey, ASC. Michelle, thank you for letting us have an opportunity to introduce ourselves, and I know a lot of people already. So I'm Rhonda Kemp Gleason. I was asked to be part of the first Emerge class that trains women in the United States and now in Louisiana to run for Democratic office. And so it took me a little while to decide to do that. I also have kids who are younger, and it's a big commitment. I teach here as well, and so I do kind of have to follow toe a certain line. But the more you think of it, I mean, I kind of think that I'm a moderate, but I think most of you would disagree with me. That's perfectly fine. I've been running to the legislature for the last 7+ years as an advocate for different reasons. I've been in committee hearings, I've been following our legislators, and we have Jean Paul Cousin in 45 right now. He's actually friends of friends, and he's a nice guy. But he does show up to vote, and his votes are always for very narrow interests. They are not for especially middle class, like we get, not to mention America. My family is from this district. We're 3 generations of teachers in District 45, which is where I am, between UL, Acadia, and where I am here on this side of town. So we have kind of a triangulated area of familiarity. And my dad was a coach and really involved in the community. We've got long-reaching friends who are in the legislature now who are part of this community. So there's a lot of support. All the men in my wing of the family are Air Force officers and airmen. And my son now is in the Air Force. So my son, my brother, my father, my grandfather. And so we're educators and we're service people through the military. So we're all service people. And I've been working as a teacher, as a tutor, as a volunteer. I forgot that I was also on Walter Como's campaign a long time ago. And that didn't go as well as I would have been, but it would have been very nice. But so I've been involved for a while, but I've been studying John Paul's record, and it's just unfortunate. And there's a veto session that was going to happen this October, and one of our legislators called me up and said, "You better run." And I said, "I'm running. I'm working on it. I'm teaching 5 classes this summer. It's taking me a while to get things going." He says, "No, you need to run." And so there's been a lot of support, people yelling at me to run, and with I don't know why John Paul just doesn't kind of stay under the radar, but he keeps insinuating himself into our narrative when things are quiet. So the veto session isn't going to happen because there are enough legislators who are conservative who have other things to do. They want to be at home with their families. They don't want to jump into it in October. But folks like John Paul, unfortunately, have the resources to take off and go just kind of poke around and go against John Bel Edwards just even out of the session. And that's a luxury that I don't have as a teacher, but I'll tell you what, when I go to the legislature in the spring, I will be hustling for teachers and for families. And I will be defending our veterans, and I'll be looking out for our best interest. I am not a legislator of leisure. I'm not going to go to the legislature and piddle around and not show up to vote or decide that, or wait around for something really good to come and sweeten the deal for me. That's not my agenda at all. I don't think we need to have more teachers and everyday people on the other side of those committee desks, because I'm tired of being an advocate and walking away 50% of the time feeling like we have no hope, 20% of the time like we actually succeeded in the legislature, and I don't know. It's jealous to think that 30% is like, we can do this again. But, you know, Michelle, I know that we've been on these different coalitions together here in the DPEC, which I'm so proud to be a member of now. I mean, I really feel like things are changing in our state. So absolutely go and support people who are in the district. Run. Just run. It costs a little bit, but if you've got a good message, people are going to come out, they're going to push you, they're going to support you. So, on that note, I can get back to my class.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for coming.
I'm going to look for that,
Okay.
Go on to with that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sally. Didn't need a microphone.
So we appreciate people that are running for office, and we appreciate people who are volunteering for campaigns, and we appreciate people who are doing simple things like having conversations with, your friends and family members about these issues, or coworkers, picking up the phone and calling your legislators when you get an email, asking you to do so about these issues. And, we are going to be working over the fall on focus groups to try to figure out the best way to talk to people about the constitutional amendment to ban abortions in Louisiana. And, we would love for any and all of you to be part of those conversations with us and, help us work on that campaign. We won't be getting the campaign actually rolling until next year, but we're going to be trying to lay some groundwork for it before then. But one of the things, I think that oftentimes we spend a lot of time picking up the phone and calling when we're angry at our legislators about something. And what we don't do often enough is thank them when they do the right thing. And so I guess maybe we can open it up for more questions or discussion before we do the thank you exercise. All right, good point. Maybe we don't have questions. All right. I was thorough.
I think you were very thorough.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure how to say this without sounding negative, but I don't know that the Louisiana Democratic Party is so on board with getting resources out to helping candidates run, to flip a seat especially. Do you have any advice on, or?
No. I mean,
I guess I'm saying I was a little disappointed since I've been running, or since I put my, so I don't know. I just feel like this isn't a really important time for us to run for office, and we're all getting told to do it, but then the support isn't there as much as others.
I mean, I think that's it's a general challenge across the South for progressives. I mean, I think that, you see this all across the country, that there was sort of a systematic disinvestment in, progressive candidates. So the question was, why is there not more support from the Democratic Party to candidates that are stepping up to run for office? And I don't work for the Democratic Party, so I can't speak for them, but.
I guess maybe that was just more of a statement to say that it has been a little discouraging. Like, I can almost see why people haven't.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's.
Unless it's a guaranteed seat to be flipped. If
Yeah.
it's a challenge, then you have to work for getting resources. I would have thought.
Yeah, I think it
And
is.
I've just been in 2 months, so I have all the experience. I would say, yeah.
Yeah, I wish that I had some better advice for you, but I mean, I do think that this is a challenge that, we see, all across the sort of the red states, is that there's not an investment in candidates. There's also not an investment in progressive organizations, that are working to try to, change policies and work with the legislators, the handful of legislators that we do have. So I do think that that is changing, but I don't know it's going to, yeah.
And women running or, Democrats running, trying to step out. But it's more of a momentum from the people and not so much, I feel, from the actual people at the hub.
Yeah.
Get things shifted. So that's just my little 2 cents today.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
So I'm
Should
one
I-
of the advisors.
Should I do the mic?
As long as you repeat the question,
Okay.
I think we'll be okay. It's kind of a statement and a question.
Okay.
So I'm the advisor for AAWP here at SLCC, and a lot of times when conversations around reproductive justice comes up, it's so taboo here, being that Lafayette and the surrounding Acadiana area is so predominantly Catholic. People they either don't want to talk about it, or they're steadfast in their pro-life stance that they don't want to consider anything else. So what kind of advice do you have as far as how to open up a dialogue to even just to talk about it in a way that's more educational and not a debate?
So the question is a good one. The question is about having a conversation with people around the issues of reproductive justice. Abortion access, I would imagine, is the most contentious part of that discussion. When people feel uncomfortable talking about it, or they are, they've taken a pro-life position, or pro-birth position, I guess, as Senator Morell would call it. And so we have been thinking a lot about this, and I think that there are people that you're never going to change their mind. They have staked out their position, and it's not movable, and it's rooted in what I would say maybe misguided or misunderstood ideas around morality and religiosity and et cetera. Then there are people who are uncomfortable with the idea of it, but they're not taking a radical position around it, and those are the people that I think you can have a conversation with around. Maybe you have an objection to it, but is this really the government's business? Because really that's what it is. It's the government legislating people's healthcare decisions. And there's no other healthcare decision that anyone would make that these people would find that's tolerable for the government to say you can or cannot have this access to this healthcare procedure. So I think we have found that is something that seems to resonate with people that are conservative and maybe come from this, like, we don't really want the government all up in our business kind of position. The other thing is maybe they're not going to ever get to a place where they are comfortable with people having an abortion. But we can't force every woman who gets pregnant to carry a pregnancy to term and then not have a supportive, policy and government program structure in the state that, that would make sure that those women don't crash into poverty, that their children are taken care of, that they, that even going to the hospital to give birth isn't going to, put them in bankruptcy. So I think those are some of the conversations that we've been having with people in Monroe, and in Alexandria. We're trying to build a constituency. I mean, ideally, we would like for women to have access, but if we lose access in the state, then we need to make sure that women can prevent an unplanned pregnancy, that they have access to birth control, and can afford that birth control. We need to make sure that they have access to the sexual health information that they need to even understand how to prevent an unplanned pregnancy. And we also need to make sure that families are economically secure, so that if faced with an unplanned pregnancy, it's not a decision that the family has to think, we can't afford to have another kid, right? Which is, a number one reason that women give for terminating a pregnancy is because they can't afford to have another children. Most women who have abortions already have children. So I think those are some of the conversations that we need to have. So rather than screaming at each other and trying to change each other's mind on the issue around abortion, maybe we can find common ground on the issue of, the government not regulating what people do in terms of their health care and their bodies. Find common ground on making sure that people have access to sex education and preventative reproductive health care services, and that we have, an economically secure, family structure, programs and policies in place that are supporting families, because that's what we need in order to, to deal with, the impacts of, a future where we may not have any clinics where women can access an abortion anyway. So that would be my suggestion. Sure. Any other questions? Okay. So I've highlighted three folks here. So Terry Landry and Vincent Pierre both voted against the constitutional amendment and the 6-week abortion ban. And Senator Boudreaux worked to change the date of the constitutional amendment. Senator Boudreaux also consistently shows up in support of some of the other sort of economic justice issues as well. So these are legislators that, live in an area where they're probably getting a lot of pressure from anti-abortion constituents, and, also under pressure from the business lobby in the legislature, and yet they did the right thing. So they should be thanked. Yes.
I just want to point out that Terry Landry also had a bill that opposing the death penalty.
That's right. Yeah. So I don't have a script. I've given you the context, and Chantrell we have a limited number of thank you notes. We may have enough. So I would encourage you, so this is what I'm asking you to do. Pick one of these folks, address, address the thank you note to them. Thank them for whatever you want to thank them for. I told you, how they voted, and then I'll collect them and I will address them and mail them to the legislators. He's retiring? Is that?
Could still thank him.
Yeah.
Sure.
So we're going to kind of wrap things up, give you guys opportunities to write your thank you notes. The handouts that I have are the voting records from this past legislative session. It's really difficult to get all of the House members on one piece of paper. So I have digital versions of these on our website, and I will email them to you if you gave me your email address when you signed in. So sometimes it's a little bit easier to see that way. And we have these voting records for past years as well. We also will create legislator profiles for the individual legislators. So if you're interested in finding out sort of, the last 4 or 5 years of historical votes of your legislator, we're happy to create those profiles for you, and you can use those to inform yourself about how you're going to vote in the future. And with that, I guess I again just want to thank Chantrell and Sally and the college and AOC for working with us on this program tonight. And thank you all so much for coming. That's it.